everybody. Thank you so much for joining us this morning for this webinar. We're very fortunate to have Sonia Clark here and Neil Peterson. My name is Manuel Ortiz, and I'm the VP of Global Business Development for First Pathway Partners. I've worked in finance for over 20 years and worked in EB-5 for about 10 years now. Worked with investors of over 40 countries. And it's been a pleasure working here at First Pathway Partners with Sonia Clark, who is just a very experienced and respected business executive with over 30 years of experience in various industries. And Sonia, I think one of the things that's been really nice to have to be working with you is that you've actually had the chance to work with United States visas and green cards really for the course of the last 13 years. And I think your ability to be in South Africa and really understand just the dynamics that are happening there and really the investor needs and motivations for EB-5 are just a great thing for us. So it's great to have you here. We're also joined by Neil Peterson, who's the visionary behind Real Estate Investor Magazine, also the editor-in-chief. And Neil, just looking through your background, it's just so impressive. You've had the privilege of meeting and interviewing many local international investors, millionaires, billionaires. You've had the chance to interview former President Donald Trump. You've also had the chance to interview Robert Kiyosaki, who's been really vocal about where the economy is headed lately. I think he actually also just had a book come out. So, really, it's just going to be such a very rich discussion with both of you here. It's just a pleasure to have you both here.
You're wonderful. Well, thank you, Manuel. Great to be here, and look forward to the webinar.
Yeah, and it's great to see you again. We actually had a chance to meet in South Africa a couple months ago. We met in Cape Town, had some really good discussions about what's happening there, and we'll be getting into that here as well.
Absolutely. I look forward to that discussion, and I'm also very fortunate that I've been to the United States quite a few times. I've been to around about 15, 16 states, to around about 30 cities in the US. So I do have good understanding of investments and real estate in particular in the US market. So, and I must say it was a real fun journey and experience in the US. So I'm quite familiar with the US markets.
Well, I think that's really interesting and very valuable for this discussion, because I think oftentimes, people think that EB-5 is just about the US and coming here, which that's a big part of it. But there are also many things that go into play in somebody's home country, right? And so like having that dynamic and understanding, I think, will be really good here. And just to give everybody a little bit of background on what we'll be talking about here, we're going to start off with the EB-5 program, which is a program that was created by the US government back in 1990. And what it was created for was to create jobs, spur the economy. And it was around for about 18 years. And in those 18 years, it really wasn't used all that much until the global financial crisis happened and credit markets started to freeze. And so then the US government really started pushing EB-5. Foreign investors wanted to come to the US, and you really just saw a complete spike in 2008, 2009 for EB-5. Initially, a lot of the investors that were coming for EB-5 were coming from China. And then as it started gaining more and more popularity, you started to see more countries get involved. So I think if you look at the countries that are driving EB-5 demand right now, it looks very different than what it did in 2008, 2009, although we are starting to see increase really for the last, call it 3 to 5 years. The Chinese market had been a little bit slower, but that started to pick up now because, what happened with the reauthorization of the EB-5 program this time around is that there were dynamics that allowed for set-aside visas that increased visa capacity for countries. So that spurred a lot of demand. And much like other things that happened in the post-pandemic era, where you heard the term pent-up demand about everything, whether you were talking about cookies, people taking trips to hotel rooms, the pent-up demand, people haven't been able to do this for a while, and it just explodes in just this big burst of demand. Well, you started to see that for EB-5 as well. If you go back to the USCIS fiscal year for this year, going through the third quarter, I think there were over 1,700 applications for EB-5, which is more than we've had in quite the time. And so I think there was a little bit of pent up demand for that. We'll definitely get into some of the things that have changed here shortly. But Sonia, maybe if you could tell us a little bit about what you're seeing in South Africa, and just some of the common reasons why South Africans would be interested in EB-5.
Yes, thanks, Manuel. When you were here, a couple of months ago in South Africa, we actually met with a couple of families, and it really is diverse. But I think the common denominator would actually be families, that have young children or high school children that want to get their children educated in the United States, that also want to actually get their children into university. And as Manuel will mention a little bit later, the cutoff is 21 years old. So, the challenge is to actually get your children under your EB-5 petition, your EB-5 application before the age of 21. So we've had a couple of cases where we do have quite a few families where they have got more than one child over the age of 21, and then they've had to, apply for a separate EB-5 visa, which is very challenging because, the amount is $800,000. So, it's really good for investors to engage with them early, so that husband, wife, and all their children under 21 actually qualify under EB-5. So I'd say education is number one. And, and we need to educate investors that they need to get their petitions in before their children turn 21 as well. The second one is safety and security. I think in terms of where everything is going globally, we are subscribers of Center of Risk Analysis. And if we look at just the price of eggs, there was a major egg shortage, just, the basic staple foods. Unfortunately, it does lead to crime. So safety and security is a big factor as well. Then also investors are looking at hedging their rands against the US dollars, actually taking their rands. I mean, if you listen to economists like Darby Root, he's talking 25 to 30 rands per US dollar. So I think it's more or less a case of forward planning, in some investors' cases. Some have still got their funds in rands, and we eagerly encourage them, when they start planning, we'll touch on it a little bit later, to look at getting their funds offshore, especially when trying to get Reserve Bank clearances. Also, the US has got a much bigger market. I mean, if you're looking at, at growing your business either in the United States or opening up a business, you've got a massive market compared to what we've got here, and just the opportunities are endless. And then we've also got other investors that want to join their family and friends. Like you said, there was a huge uptake of EB-5 going way back. And there's a huge community of South Africans in the US already, and they spread all over. But we also find that Florida is a preferred destination. So, looking at moving there, it could be older investors that don't even have children that want to just literally go and spend the rest of their life in the US. So I think that puts it in a nutshell, in terms of South Africa.
Yeah, thank you for that, Sonia. Those are really good points. And I mean, you touched on something that I think is really important there, where you're talking about, the US is a bigger market for business and like those things. Oftentimes, investors that we've talked to have businesses in South Africa, and they're either looking to expand their business in the US or start from scratch. And Neil, this is something that you know very well in working with South African real estate investors. Maybe if you could give us a little background on Real Estate Investor Magazine, the services that you've provided, and then also just some of the insights that you've gained from talking to South African investors now.
Great, thanks very much there, Manuel. Interestingly enough, real estate investors' roots are actually quite deeply entrenched from the United States. And in fact, it was about 2005, 2006, I actually was introduced to a gentleman down in Phoenix, Arizona, who actually ran a publication there called Personal Real Estate Investor Magazine. And so the name just stuck here in South Africa when I launched eventually in 2007. and just utilize the name and the concept. You know, I was a private property investor or real estate investor myself. And so obviously I needed to sort of get onto the international stage. And, you know, and over the years, I learned a lot of what to do and what not to do, and how to seek out the best real estate investments and what works and doesn't work. So as a result of that, I followed sort of the best practice. Who are the people that are sort of leading the charge in terms of education and in terms of, you know, selecting the right investments for an investor? So I followed them all, and I went on a global trail trying to find out, you know, almost the holy grail type of thing, seeking for that. And obviously with that, I met all these wonderful people. And, you know, so my job was to say, well, listen, I need to share this message to a lot wider audience. I need to take it to South Africa. And let's talk about the message of real estate investing in residential, commercial, and even offshore. Because, you know, I don't believe that people should, you know, look at the world, you know, just from your own country. You have to have a global viewpoint of what's actually happening. And if you don't, you're either first of all, you're going to lose perspective. And I think the world has become a global village. The internet has allowed that to happen. But I also think from investments, education, and all the other rest, we've got to look at the world, you know, from a much larger perspective. So, and we've seen, you know, South Africans, because we predominantly English speaking. So as a result, we look for the English speaking countries in the UK, the US, Canada, you know, Australia, New Zealand. Those are kind of the first ports of call. So, and then of course, you know, other people that are deeply rooted in other areas of Europe. So that's where it sort of came out, and really the message was not only, you know, investing in real estate in South Africa, but also looking at investments for your family, and EB-5 would typically be one. If somebody wants to invest in your education, which I think is probably the best thing you can ever do for your family, because, you know, that's one thing you never lose for the rest of your life, and that is your education. And, you know, in South Africa, we've got a lot of challenges here besides, you know, electricity challenges, and also, you know, also most state-owned entities which have been running to the ground. You know, municipalities are not offering good services. Besides, where I'm sitting in Cape Town, which is the southern tip of South Africa, whereas Sonia's feeling the brunt a little bit more out there up north. And it tends to be in sort of the government, the ANC controlled areas where things are really not, you know, working really well. I mean, there's water challenges, as I mentioned, electricity, and all the services are just not. So getting back to our services that we offer, we really are a mouthpiece, and we also do live events and that kind of stuff. We are a mouthpiece for people to seek those particular destinations or that particular investment vehicle, and whether it could be an EB-5 or it could be a piece of real estate in anywhere in around the world. And we've done US tours, by the way, as well, which I can elaborate a little bit later. But yeah, that's essentially, so really it's our foundation is built on building wealth, and certainly through the mouthpiece of education. And hence, that's why I met all these wonderful people that you gave in the introduction. I mean, I met Donald Trump in Australia, you know, in Sydney, not in the US. I think he's quite a busy man to get hold of in the US. So, but interesting guy. And I managed to have, you know, exchange some words with him. But, you know, the guy you see is the guy you get. There's not much difference, you know, from anybody else's experience there. So just to get into the minds of those people, to get to understand them, and how you can actually apply that for yourself. But yeah, so that's essentially what we're about. So thanks for that opportunity.
Yeah, and now let me ask you a quick question, because real estate ties into the EB-5 investment process as well. And what we've seen in many countries is that, and I don't know if people know this, so, you know, oftentimes when people think about the investment amount for EB-5, that it's $800,000, and it allows the applicant spouse and unmarried children the ability to obtain permanent U.S. residency. They feel that $800,000 has to be cash in their bank account. But oftentimes what ends up happening is they sell their real estate assets to come up with $800,000, or they can get a loan against an asset in their home country against part or all of their value of their asset, right? So I think that's kind of one of the things that I think people aren't as aware of. And maybe if you could talk a little bit about what the real estate market in South Africa is right now for people that are looking to either sell an asset or get a loan for part of that value.
Yeah, great. So Manu, I think what we got to realize is that the majority of people, certainly in South Africa, most of their money is invested in real estate, in property, as we would call it. But so essentially, I would say it's more than 55% of wealth. So people need to tap into that. They normally have to either sell a property or refinance that property. And there's also a lot of people that own more than one property as well. Could have a holiday house, they could have some industrial properties for rent, they could have residential properties for rent, or they could have even, a larger sort of commercial, portfolio. So South Africans are definitely real estate crazy. And I think very much like in the US, I still believe that, despite all the other challenges, all the other asset classes, it still is an excellent asset class, and it's shown itself over the years. But I'm not going to try to convince everybody on this right now. But yeah, the South African market is quite interesting what's happening right now. And, as I mentioned, because of all the challenges that we're actually having, with services and municipalities, because, they essentially are a feeder system to your electricity, to your all your sanitation systems and everything else that is associated with that. And people are paying levies, and levies are going up, and rates are going up, but the services are going down. So and that's the problem. We're getting more potholes in the streets. They're not getting maintained. Just the common areas for real estate and outside, which be supposed to be run by the municipalities, are not getting maintained properly. And so what's actually happened is that a lot of people are looking at two things. One, they're looking at semigration, which means that they're moving from one state, we call it a province, from one province to another. And so essentially they're looking at migrating. And where I'm based, which is the Western Cape, which as I mentioned, it's the tip of Africa. A lot of people are moving from, provinces like KwaZulu-Natal, and also, Gauteng, which is in the north, in fact, where Sonia is based, and they're moving to Cape Town. But Cape Town almost becomes like the last stand before they leave South Africa. So people are looking at two things. Obviously, yes, their children, and I think, is a big thing, and education, because our education is well, certainly state education has dropped significantly. So people are looking, at private education and also abroad. I think that's exceptionally important, So there's this mass migration into the Western Cape, into Cape Town, and we already are a massive tourism destination, and there's only space for so much people. Our roads are really overloaded, and even our local government is still controlled by national government in many ways. We're not a federal state, as it is in the US and in countries like Australia as well, where obviously everybody runs all the services nationally. So national government still has, their hand on everything, and they control all the purse strings. And so look, because of the economy, but the world economy is not in a good state. But if you look at the US, they're performing so much better because you're still getting things right. We should be performing better, but unfortunately, it's not getting better because the existing government is really, that they're bloated. They don't have the capacity. They don't have the understanding. And we look at now, there's this African Growth and Opportunity Act, which one of the US Democratic senators, Chris Coons, he's suggesting that we get removed from that program, which would be absolutely disastrous for South Africa if that happens. And also our government has got this thing about, siding with Iran and Hamas and Palestine, and it's going to cause a lot of damage. There's, and I think that at the senior government, they don't understand the consequences of all these decisions and aligning themselves with seems to be the wrong parties. And also there's also a closeness with Russia, which is a concern, and all that kind of stuff. So there's all these kind of concerns, and we're coming up to a general election next year on the 1st of May. So a lot of people are saying, well, look, I don't want to wait around for that. I want to get out of here. Or I want to come down to the Western Cape, where it is run by, the opposition party, which is doing exceptionally well. I mean, they're doing really well. But as I mentioned, they got challenges from a national perspective. So I'm not sure whether I've answered your question yet, Manuel. I know I've gone off in a bit of a tangent on economy and that kind of stuff.
No, not at all. You actually did answer the question very well, and it led me into one other question that I started thinking of, because you mentioned the Western Cape and it being a tourist hotspot, people moving there, which then leads to the question about real estate values there. So because I guess from what you're saying, that the opposition party is running a bit of a smoother operation there, that area is big for tourism and those things. Are you seeing that real estate values in the Western Cape are holding their values? And the reason that I'm thinking about, or increasing in value, and the reason that I'm thinking about that is that, for somebody that's considering EB-5, real estate is the number one source to come up with that capital investment. So maybe if you could give us some thoughts about just the real estate valuations there.
No, absolutely. Yeah. So obviously demand drives up prices. So we're going to see real estate prices will definitely increase. There's more of a massive demand for rentals because we've got as I mentioned, we've got a moribund economy. It's not moving forward as it should. People can't get loans. There's obviously unemployment is also at an all-time high. And so the banks are not really granting, and they're being, really sticky about granting loans, and it's really just in the entry level markets that really, where all the action is, and we've got obviously a large unhoused community here in South Africa. That's the other thing. I mean, even though we've got an over 60 million population, I mean, I would say more than half are, they're probably living in squalor, or they're living in townships and not with a proper roof over their head, which is also the other problem. So that's a whole, sort of problem within itself. So if you look at us, our population, and that's actually credit worthy. It's really, you're talking about a third of the population that that's really got money to look at buying real estate or even invest in any kind of real estate. But having said that, yes, the Western Cape has benefited from obviously prices going up. And, it's also not a bad thing to rent in your property where, to live, and obviously to put your investments out where that's giving you a return. And that's another strategy as well. A lot of people, they tend to say, like in South Africa, we have this thing, you've got to own the house that you live in. You don't necessarily have to. And I think it's a South African story. We tend to buy real estate a lot younger in South Africa. You'd be in your 20s, even though that trend has changed now of recent times. And I've seen in the US, it tends to come a little bit later in life, more in your 30s, 40s kind of thing. That's when you jump into the market. Certainly in the UK, those are the trends that we see. And also in countries like Australia, people get into, which means that you should start looking at other investments in other areas. Like, EB-5 is backed by real estate. Your product is a real estate product. So, and that's fantastic because you're underpinning it, and it almost gives you, such a satisfaction in the sense that that money is parked into an asset that's going to appreciate, and understanding the US markets. I mean, we took a crowd of about 50 investors to Atlanta 2011, 2012, and I think it was 8 Rand to the dollar. I mean, now we're sitting at 19, almost 20. And everybody that invested in the US market, starting from 80 to about 180,000 US, and I think from our last discussion, you told me those prices had escalated. Everybody made money just based on the pure currency, and the real estate was just a bonus. It was an absolute bonus. So. Yeah, so I think there's, we need to open our minds to the things like EB-5 and it's as investment opportunity, and I don't think it's a goodbye to your own home country. I think open it up as an opportunity to put your kids into a fantastic education, it's a great investment, and in many cases, I mean, you know the ins and outs, but I know quite a few people who've invested in EB-5. They've actually got their money back, so which is wonderful. And you're also feeding an economy in the US as well. So I think it ticks a lot of boxes there as well. So even despite the challenges in terms of price entry, yeah.
Yeah, I think you bring up some really good points, and also in talking about investing in the US, like you mentioned, it could be very much a hedge against a devaluation in somebody's home country. And I think that if somebody's thinking about doing something like this, there are obviously foreign exchange things that need to be considered. And Sonia, maybe if you could talk a little bit about that. I know you've had recent discussions with investors that are going through the process of going through EB-5, and just some of the things that they need to consider in terms of foreign exchange and those things.
Yes, of course. So obviously some of the I'm not a tax expert, but we do consult with tax experts, and we've been on webinars with tax experts. But tax and Forex go hand in glove. So if your money is still in South Africa, you've got to take into account that you need tax clearance certificates and Reserve Bank clearance certificates. In terms of the foreign exchange, there are various structures that one can look at, in terms of actually placing your, in the case of EB-5, in terms of placing your EB-5 funds into a structure, or even just moving your funds out of South Africa. So there are various ways of going about it. You can do it through your own local bank. And then you've obviously got various foreign exchange companies that offer you a better percentage at the end of the day. I know Investec has got a facility that's really, really good, but you guys can go and speak to Investec about that, where you can bring funds in and out, also at a very preferential rate as well. So yes, in terms of foreign exchange, it's really, really important to look at what the futurists are saying, and what the risk aspect is for you, to keep your money in South African rands. It's just a case of really taking each and every case and each and every family and structuring it according to how it's going to work, because it's not necessarily just EB-5 funds. It could very well be the sale of a business or business assets, and you need to know how you're going to go about that process. So I think foreign exchange, taxation go hand in glove. So yes, if anybody needs to speak to one of the experts, of course, we can certainly put you in touch with the ones we work with.
I think those are really good points.
To answer your questions.
Yes, no, definitely. And I would say that, if you've gone through, you have a real estate asset, you decide to sell it or get a loan against a part of it to complete your EB-5 investment, you contact the proper professionals for foreign exchange, and like those things. And then you decide, okay, EB-5 is the right thing for me. Then I think that's where an investor really needs to understand the EB-5 process and what it's all about. And that's just what I'll talk about briefly right now, is that, when investors are looking at an EB-5 project, right? Again, it's an $800,000 investment, and it allows the applicant spouse and unmarried children under the age of 21 to obtain permanent U.S. residency. It requires the investment into a project. And I think oftentimes, investors can get very focused on either the immigration aspect of the project or the investment aspect of the project. But I think it's very important to keep in mind that for it to be a successful EB-5 project, it has to be structured properly on the immigration side and also properly on the investment side, meaning that there has to be a business case for the investment. The immigration side is what's going to allow you to obtain your permanent green card for you and your family. The investment side of it is what's going to allow you to get your capital back, your $800,000 back. And so I think that that's one very important thing to focus on. For our project that we have that's located in the Coachella Valley, that's about a 2.5 hour drive from Los Angeles and the city of San Diego. Over 26 million people live within a 2.5 hour drive of our project. I think it's really important to emphasize that it's fundamentally sound on the investment side and on the immigration side. Each investor is required to create 10 jobs. And, we are raising funds from a maximum of 135 investors. At 10 jobs each, we need a minimum of 1,350 jobs. Well, the exciting thing is that this project started last year, and we've already created over 1,500 jobs. So all the jobs from an immigration standpoint have already been created for an investor that invests today or that invested last year. They've checked that immigration box. So really, from the immigration side, the risk is very minimal, if any. And then on the investment side of it, this is the first type of resort of this kind that's been built over the course of the last 40 years there. There's an Arnold Palmer golf course that's already there. It's a Montage and a Pendry, hotel brands that are ultra luxury. If you're familiar with the Four Seasons and JW Marriott, these are right on par with that or even just above that. And that type of an investment isn't very common in EB-5, especially at that $800,000 level. And the reason that there hasn't been this type of a resort built there in the last 40 years is because what's happened in a post-pandemic environment is that you have record number of tourism heading to the area. One of the neighboring cities there is Palm Springs. The Palm Springs Airport is going through a massive infrastructure project to be able to handle the additional capacity of people that are visiting the area. Post-pandemic environment, you have people that want to connect with nature and be at this type of a location, and the infrastructure just doesn't exist there. When people visit the Coachella Valley, they're typically renting houses, Airbnbs, or staying at some of the older properties that have been there that are very nice, but they are going to be a little older. So there's a need for this type of investment, and there's a business case for this type of investment. The city where it's located, which is La Quinta, the city also invested over $92 million of infrastructure for this project. And so it's a project that we feel is very conservative from the investment case and also from the immigration standpoint. And I think investors really need to consider that as they're looking at investment options. And so maybe if you also want to talk a little bit about just the different players that are involved in this and people that investors need to contact, because we focus a lot on the $800,000 investment, but they also need to work with an immigration attorney, right? Because our role in this is to administer the investment aspect of it, but they also need to work with an immigration attorney. Maybe you could talk about the importance of that and the long-term relationship there as well.
Sure. Manuel, thank you. So if I can just go through all the different steps, that's what I'll do in a moment. But like Manuel would normally explain it, you've got two pillars. You've got the investment pillar, and that's the first process. And then the second process is your immigration attorney. So your $800,000 will go through a regional center into the project that Manuel's just explained. And the documents that you actually sign, your subscription agreements, then have to be sent to the immigration attorney. The immigration attorney is the one that actually files with US Citizen and Immigration Service. And you need to work closely with an immigration attorney that you feel comfortable with, because it's a long road. I mean, you're looking at 5 years, and an immigration attorney has to build your case from your source of funds, to make sure it's from a legitimate source, and get all your documents together and actually present it to USCIS. So yes, we work hand in glove with the immigration attorney. So what we do is we facilitate the introductions to maybe one or two or three different attorneys that the investor can then decide which attorney they're most comfortable working with. Possibly on the first interaction with the immigration attorney, the investor will say, I'm really, really happy. I feel confident that my case will be successful through this particular immigration attorney. So yes, I think the first step would be we do the first consultation with a potential investor for an EB-5 petition, and we can then assess to see whether they're the right fit for EB-5. There's different criteria. I mean, you need to firstly have the $800,000 US. It's got to come from a legitimate source. So that is the first step. Second step, we explain to you exactly the benefits of EB-5. And I'll touch on some of the benefits. Just some of the benefits would be You would get in-state tuition, which you can save thousands of dollars, as a permanent resident, as opposed to an international student. You get some healthcare benefits, you can get some grants, you can live anywhere in the USA. So it doesn't restrict you in terms of what the other visa categories do. And then, of course, it's a green card for the whole family, and nobody can take the green card away from you. From there, we delve into the project. Investors want to know exactly where my fund's going to, how it's structured, and how do I get my funds returned. Once I understand what we do in that first process, then it goes to the immigration attorney. The immigration attorney will break down the immigration process. We're not immigration attorneys. It's important to know the immigration law. And then we assist investors as well with facilitating, getting your subscription agreements, which is your project agreements and the escrow agreements, together for the immigration attorney. And then we engage with both the immigration attorney, you as the investor, all the way to see that it's a seamless process. So, we basically assist investors every single step of the way, where I know some of our competitors don't do that. They basically file the petition and then they hand over to the immigration attorney. But we stay in touch even with investors once they have their funds returned, and some of them come to visit us. So yes, we're very hands-on. So I think if that explains it, the two different processes, the regional center, which is us, and the immigration attorney.
I think that's a great explanation. And I would also add that, you touched on something really important, the education aspect of it, right? Because when an international student comes to the US, they're coming on an F1 visa. And you're right about the cost. The cost can vary. If you're a US resident, maybe your tuition is anywhere from $5,000 to $15,000. But if you're an international student, it can be $50,000 to $100,000. If you have multiple kids, that cost gets incredibly high. And I've had discussions with investors sometimes that say, well, you know what, the cost of education, we're fine paying that, it doesn't matter. And it's still cheaper than the $800,000 investment, which is true. But then what ends up happening when the child graduates from university, they have a short period of time to find a job. And if they're not able to find a US corporation that sponsors them, they can't stay in the US. And then that becomes something that's very priceless, being able to stay here. And that's the power of EB-5, because, it not only saves you on costs, but it unlocks power for you to be able to choose where you want to work, not have to depend on a US corporation to sponsor you. And that also reminds me of, oftentimes EB-5, you think of people that are not here, but EB-5 is open for people that are here. For people that are already here and are sponsored by a corporation on what's called an H-1B visa, you can apply for EB-5 as well. And, within, and the range can vary, but anywhere from, 7 to 14 months, you can receive permission to travel and to work in the US. And so I think those are really valuable things that are priceless, because it does unlock power for you to be able to have a choice. And again, it's an $800,000 investment, and it's a permanent green card for the applicant, a spouse, and unmarried children under the age of 21. Neil, as we're starting to get to the end of this webinar, do you have any thoughts that you have? Anybody, if you have any questions, please feel free to send those through as well, and we can go to those. But Neil, if you have any closing thoughts, and Sonia, if you have any closing thoughts as well, please feel free to add those. Let's go ahead and start with Neil.
Yeah. No, good. I think so. So I think, I would just say to somebody, if they are considering, to take along the EB-5, just understand what is your fundamental reason for doing it. And I mean, if it's education, then that to me makes a lot of sense. If it's other reasons, obviously moving into a more first world economy. I mean, I know a lot of people have moved even from countries like New Zealand, which is not considered, well, it's considered first world, but they're moving into a bigger world economy, because the US is, 50 states. It just is a massive economy just in terms of size. It's the number one economy in the world. Your world changes significantly when you move there. And it just has, you've got so many things on your doorstep. The amount of, everything is tenfold there, and, that is just the United States. So your world sort of becomes your oyster, whether it's from the currency, whether it's from real estate, And it is within people's reach. That's what I've realized from working with investors. Somebody looks at it and says, "Wow, 800,000 USD. I don't know if I've got that," but how can you get it if you really want to sort of raise that kind of money? As I say, you can sell businesses, you can sell real estate. There are ways you can raise it. There's different ways. So, and you also, of the people that I know that have invested, have got their funds back. They've actually got their money back. So, which is quite interesting that what an investment like that even gave them a return. They didn't just get the green card. They got the education, they got the green card, and they got their money back, which is fantastic. So, I mean, that's kind of ticks all the boxes. And yeah, I think one of the things about the US economy as well, it is such well controlled. I mean, I saw, I was listening now to Sonia, in terms of the steps you got to follow and that kind of stuff. And, and I think that's where, that's a good thing for an investor. Your money is safe. You know where it's going to. You've got your attorneys, your lawyers, which are signing off on everything, that you're making sure that everything's going in the right direction. Because in South Africa we've had just recently so many people that have lost money, gone into different investment schemes and that kind of stuff. So you kind of have to be careful where you're putting your money and where it's going through. And I think that's where you put a lot of emphasis, Manuel, on compliance and that kind of stuff, and following certain steps all along the way, which I think is critically important for any investor, not just to willy-nilly just take your money and say, "Well, Manuel, can I deposit it into your bank account, please?" So it doesn't work like that. It just doesn't. You have to go through a whole process. And and I just want to put people out there, to give them the peace of mind that if you work through, you need to work through a partner like First Pathway Partners that can assist you along the way. You cannot, just do it yourself. It is definitely a more difficult way. And that's what I found also in real estate. As soon as you're going into a different country, going anywhere, you've got to make sure you've got the right partners along the way. Otherwise, you're gonna hurt yourself. A lot of people, they so-called front themselves as good partners, and there's different ways that you can check and see. And you need to verify. And the fact we got also Sonia sitting in South Africa as well. She's within striking distance, so she's not going anywhere at the moment. She's within your reach and everything to everybody. So I just wanted to sort of put that message across. So.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. And Sonia, would you like to add anything as we wrap up here as well?
Yes, thank you, Manuel. And Neil, well said. Thank you very much. And thank you for giving us insights into the US market and global markets in terms of real estate. I found it really interesting. I mean, I come from a property background as well. So it really shed some light for me, not just for me personally, but also for the investors that we're talking to. So thank you. Yes, so I actually want to close off by saying that you get various different visa categories, and the immigration attorneys will go through those different visa categories with you so that you can understand exactly what they are. But the only visa category that really leads to a green card, for you have assurance of a green card, is the EB-5 visa. So, for you to be able to obtain your green card for you and your whole family. And like I said, no one can take it away from you. So, and then I also just want to close by saying that, the industry's now become highly regulated. The project has also got to be USCIS approved. The regional center has to be USCI approved, and obviously us as individuals have to be USCI approved. So I want to leave that closing thought with you. We tick all the boxes there as well. And I just want to thank Manuel and Neil for today, and also for my participation today as well. Thank you, Manuel.
Thank you so much for that. And I'd like to thank all of our attendees as well. And I'd like to close just with saying that, really, when investors are looking at EB-5, it's really important, as Neil said, to look at people that you can trust, at firms like ours that you can trust. But how do you know, right? There are so many social media advertisements and so much information out there that really the only way that you know is by studying the track record, talking to people, meeting people. How many times have they returned investor capital already? First Pathway Partners, we've been around since 2008. We have multiple projects where we've returned investor capital and what's called completed the cycle. That means investors obtaining their permanent residency, obtaining their permanent green card, and receiving their capital back. So studying that track record is really what sets you apart, because in EB-5, there are new entrants all the time. You have flashy projects all the time, really nice marketing materials, brochures that look great. But what doesn't lie is really the track record. So I would really encourage everybody to do their due diligence, study the track record. Please reach out to us with any questions. And I'd just like to thank everybody once again and look forward to speaking with you in the future. Thank you.
Awesome. No, thanks very much. Thank you.
Thank
Cheers,
you.
everybody. Bye.